Everyone, welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie Pack, and I have with me today one of the employees at Healing Path, one of our therapists, Bridget Good. So, welcome, Bridget.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so this is Bridget's first time on the show, but hopefully not her last. We already have an idea for the podcast we want to talk about next time she comes on the show. So, she may be a regular face. But tell us a little bit about yourself, Bridget.
So let's see. I started at Healing Pass in September, so I have not been here very long or there very long. I graduated with my MSW last year in August, and I was managing an abortion clinic or a women's health clinic for about 2 years, and that's when I realized that I'm a terrible business manager, but I'm actually really good at listening to people's problems and like holding space for them. So that's when I decided to go back to school for social work. I actually have another master's in healthcare administration because I thought that was what I was going to do. And life was like, no, you should do this. So Here I am. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying being a therapist. I think it's great. It's a lot to learn, but it can be really fun.
Yeah. And we love having you as part of the team.
Thanks.
So when Bridget and I started talking about some ideas we had about recording, one of the first ones that came up and what we're going to talk about today is there's been some new documentaries released. I don't know. Do you know when they were released? Fairly recently.
So the Hulu one was released last year, and the Netflix one was released, a month ago, 2 months ago?
Okay. Yeah. So there's two documentaries out, one on Hulu, one on Netflix, both covering Ashley Madison. And, you know, I was in the field when Ashley Madison and that whole thing kind of blew up. And I would say both documentaries covered some of the similar information, but also each one gave a little bit different information. So I thought it was beneficial to watch both. But, you know, if you're not recording a podcast, you might not want to watch both or feel like that's a priority.
I felt like the Hulu one was better. I think it gave a lot more detailed information than the
Netflix. I think it gave some more facts.
Right. Yeah.
And each one had like some different couples that they followed who were impacted when the hack happened with Ashley Madison. So, yeah, but I thought the Hulu one had a few more facts as well. So anyway, if you're on one or the other, there is a documentary on those platforms. So we're going to start talking about that today. We're going to talk about we're going to cover some of the history of what happened and what went down. And then we're going to talk about like, what are the implications, you know, as a mental health therapist, like what did each of the documentaries kind of highlight as some issues that were happening in the relationships? I mean, we would say they were probably some issues. I don't know that Ashley Madison would say they were issues. I think they felt like they were solving issues. But we'll get into that. So we've kind of divided it up into 4 parts. I'm going to take parts 1 and 3. We're just going to cover parts 2 and 4. And so let's get started into Ashley Madison. So Ashley Madison started in 2002. And let me get to my right page because I took notes that I want to reference.
I know I have 6 pages of notes.
Yes. Yeah. I have different notes from different documentaries. Then I had to try to put them into one thought process. So, Okay. So Ashley Madison launched in 2002. And I think that's a key time because they cover, like, it was at a time when only 59% of people in the United States were even on the internet. That's how early in the internet history Ashley Madison launched. But online dating was becoming more popular and more acceptable for a way for people to meet each other. And Ashley Madison, the original founders of Ashley Madison, saw reports that said that on these traditional dating sites, up to 30% of the profiles were actually married people pretending to be single who were looking to have an affair. And so they thought, what if we offer a platform where they can be honest about that? And they don't have to pretend to be single. They can be honest about the fact that they're married and they're looking to have an affair. And so, Ashley Madison basically was born. And that was, I would say, kind of a light bulb moment for them. And so they started this website. They specifically wanted to attract heterosexual females to the site. Mm-hmm. And they don't say this, but you get the idea that they knew attracting females, married females, was going to be more difficult than attracting male users. And so they wanted the site to be user friendly. And they took the two most popular baby names at the time in 2002, which was Ashley and Madison, and put them together, right? Genius marketing, a little bit creepy, and a very white person name.
Oh, for sure. And let's just be clear, to be honest with each other on the site, not be honest with their spouses.
Exactly. Right. Yes, because they were marketing, part of their promise to users was it was a very private. They used a lot of discretion. I mean, discretion and secrecy was a big seller to promote this website, even though, and we'll talk about, they knew that they had security issues. Mm-hmm. The internet was still fairly new. And so there just weren't a lot of corporations that were being hacked at the time. But there were people who were saying our security is lax. If somebody tried to get past our security, it would not be hard at all. So they launched in January of 2002, and pretty much right off the bat, they got about 60,000 users. By August of 2022, they had 550,000 users. So they were seeing a lot of growth, which I think was their focus, right? Growth over privacy and security. So they talked about providing discretion and secrecy and privacy, but that's not necessarily what they were doing on the back end. And they knew that. So it opened up the possibility also for people who maybe hadn't really considered having an affair or hadn't come across circumstances in which an affair might organically happen. All of a sudden there was this platform and this means that made it more accessible for them to start to have an affair. In 2007, they had 1.2 million users. So again, the site just continued to grow. Mm-hmm. But the problem they were running into is mainstream advertisers would not run their ads. And their ads were pretty aggressive, very assertive, but it was making it difficult for Ashley Madison to get the exposure that they wanted and to be in front of as many people as they wanted. But all of that changed in 2007 when they brought on a new CEO, Noel Biederman. Mm-hmm. And he was initially a sports attorney, mm-hmm. which he says made him aware of all the affairs that were happening. But he also, they describe him as a PR genius. And I mean, he was, right? If your marketing platform is any publicity is good publicity, then they chose the right guy, right? And I mean, their numbers continued to grow. And so that seemed evident. I think they were happy with their CEO. Like I said, they were making quite provocative ads. I would call some of their ads misogynistic towards women. At least the women, the wives, right?
Right.
Not necessarily the women on the site, but the wives. Is this the marriage? You love this person, but is this, maybe it shows her kind of asleep, kind of with a,
right.
Whatever, is this the person you want to be with forever, right? So when Noel, Noel, Biederman took over as CEO, that's when Ashley Madison really started getting a lot of publicity. And he would go on different shows. He went on The View. He went on, I can't remember all the people.
He was on Bloomberg a lot. I think that's
Yeah.
a financial
Yeah.
something. Yeah. Because I remember that popping up a lot in both the
Hmm.
documentaries.
Yeah. And he was on talk shows, things like that, right? They had him on.
CNN.
Yes. At one point, I mean, he was on Sean Hannity. He was
He was
kind
on
of,
Dr. Phil.
oh,
I
was
found
he on
a
Dr. Phil?
YouTube video of him on Dr. Phil.
Well, I saw one of him and Oprah with Dr. Phil sitting next to him, like just kind of like his face is dropping as this guy's talking.
Right.
Um, so, you know, he was claiming things like, you know, monogamy just isn't in our DNA. And so we have this very maybe Christian or patriarchal model of relationships that really it goes against the DNA of human beings, which, you know, he didn't offer any research. He didn't offer any studies stating that. He was not looking at DNA of human beings. He was just making these claims. You know, at one point, he was kind of known as the most hated man,
Right.
as
Well,
the most hated man out there.
he also described himself, this came up in both documentaries, as a postmodern feminist.
Yes, he
Which
did.
was like, I'm a feminist. I don't think I'm fighting for my right to cheat on my spouse. Like,
Right.
that's not something that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that most feminists don't feel that way.
Right. Or to be somebody who is like being the cheater, right, against this other unknown woman, maybe.
Right.
And, you know, he talked about some of his quotes. You know, he talked about how affairs are marriage savers.
Mm-hmm.
He compared himself to a marriage counseling, stating that Ashley Madison had saved, you know, more marriages than most marriage counselors, because it opened up these possibilities for them to, you know, they didn't want to actually leave their marriage. They just wanted excitement. They wanted some novelty. You know, they wanted to explore sexual fantasies with somebody that they weren't married to. You know, and he talked about how love and sex are two different things. And so you could go get happy, have great sex, but then you could come home to your spouse, this person that you love and that you don't want to leave. And the marriage is actually preserved through infidelity, which, again, some really, I would say, novel ideas that maybe hadn't been presented before. I don't know that they stand up to the test of time, because a lot of the marriages that the documentary covered got really rocked by this, ended, or had some significant issues as part of the marriage. Like, none of the spouses who were cheated on were like, I'm so grateful for Ashley Madison and its positive impact on my marriage.
Right.
So the way that it worked, and he would talk about too, before I go there, that he was helping people escape the bounds of the patriarchal marriage,
which is that post-feminist idea that he was like leaning on to.
Yeah. Which isn't really this postmodern feminist idea. Like, again, like you were saying, it's not about the cheating.
Right.
Like, postmodern feminism would be like bringing men more into the labor of the marriage, of running the household, all of that type of stuff.
And emotional intimacy of like
yes,
a real, actually deep relationship.
Right. So that's not, you know, what he was talking about, but he represented himself, I think, in a lot of ways that were, again, if you're just marketing this company, that he knew it was controversial. And so he could also be controversial. And again, if your marketing strategy is any publicity is good publicity, which it did seem like with Ashley Madison, a lot of the negative publicity they were getting seemed to drive the numbers up.
Right.
So I just had a few more things I wanted to talk about before I'll hand it off to you for the second part. I was going to talk about, So in 2008, just a year after Neil Biederman took over, they had 1.8 million users. So it grew from 1.2 to 1.8 in just 1 year. And then the scandal with the governor of New York, Eliot Spitzer, came out. And, he had ran for governor of New York on this platform of family values. And then it came out that, he was hiring women to have sex with him. And, one of they took that situation, he was kind of humiliated and shamed in the public for having, this contradiction of running on family values. And yet he's not being faithful to his own marriage. And so Noel Biederman took out a full page ad on the New York Post, which everybody in New York reads, and said, "We hate to say we told you so, but you should have used ashleymadison.com." Again, it's just this, it is some good marketing tactics to take whatever is happening and is in the public consciousness at that point and to, do some marketing around that. That's not a bad marketing idea. Most people do that. It's just the nature of what they were marketing was quite controversial. And the ads just continued. They started a whole billboard ad, and then they got some TV ads. Often they got pulled, like they had some ads on ESPN that got pulled. But they also talked about how that was a point of pride for them. If they had made an ad that they got on TV and it got pulled, that was actually a point of pride for the producers and the people coming up with that ad strategy. So the way that Ashley Madison worked was that you would log in, again, back in 2002, you're logging in on your website browser, which isn't the most safe or confidential. It leaves a history. If anybody's watching or checking the history, it's going to be there, right? But you would create an account. As a male, you would create an account, and then you'd have to buy credits in order to talk to women. And for women, if they wanted to be on the site, it was free to women because, again, this model would only work if they could attract heterosexual females looking to have an affair to signing up. So for female users, the site was free. For male users, they had to buy credits and then spend those credits in order to be able to talk to the women on the site. And then the iPhone launched. Mm-hmm. And, they kind of talk about how Steve Jobs, not knowing, but revolutionized the world of online dating by having the iPhone created, where, with laptops, you kind of had to be sneaky and, sneaky in order to hide your browser history. And then with an app, it made it a lot less, like it was harder for somebody to find you, to catch, right? And so it made it a lot easier for them. They could hide the app in some other, with some other thing, and they could just use their cell phone, which was portable with them, and they could take it and have privacy with it. So the iPhone kind of helped unknowingly, right? But it really helped with this Ashley Madison success.
So Sam in the Netflix documentary was like, I would just put it in a folder and dump a bunch of other things in that folder that were like junk. Really.
Yeah. So that his wife ever clicked on that, it would kind of be buried with this other stuff. And she'd probably just look at that and see that it was trash, junk mail stuff. Yeah. So, okay. Do you want to take over with part 2?
Yeah. So eventually Noel brings on his wife, Amanda Biederman, into all of these marketing campaigns, mostly billboards, but he would also take her on to different talk shows. So in the documentaries, they do show various clips of her on these different talk shows. I could only find one on YouTube because I wanted to watch the full thing. I couldn't find the rest of them. So I'm not sure where they're at, maybe because they're so old,
Yeah.
But there is one pretty notorious one interview in 2013 where he brings Amanda on. And Amanda at this point is on a billboard that says, "Your wife is hot, but so are ours." And it's like just her face, or I think there's like two, one of her face and then one of her like sitting on this couch, like seductively. So him and Amanda went on The View together in 2013. And Amanda says something along the lines of like, Ashley Madison is not creating cheaters. It's just a service. Like cheating is going to happen regardless. We're just providing this like service for them.
Yeah, I think they talked about how like we didn't create infidelity.
Right.
We're just giving people a platform to hook up with each other.
Right. Like it's going to happen regardless, which feels icky to me. Like it just feels like the drug dealer that's just like, well, I don't really agree with this, but people are going to do drugs. So I might as well deal the drugs for them, you know? Like, I don't know. It just feels kind of gross. So when Amanda comes on The View, they ask her, how can she be the face of Ashley Madison when she disagrees with cheating? Because on The View, they ask her, like, would you be okay if Noel cheated on you? And she's like, no, I would be absolutely devastated. I would be crushed. And they're like, well, then how can you think that, but then do this? And it's interesting because she like twists herself, like the mental gymnastics that she kind of goes through. Because what she says is, having myself up there, up on the billboard, will spawn some conversations amongst married people that do not even talk about this issue. This issue is such a prevalent issue, and no one wants to talk about it. What if a happily married man and woman will actually start to talk about this and it won't lead down that path? And it just kind of amazes me, like the pretzels that she's kind of weaving together to like be okay with this, like the rationalizations that she's kind of creating because of her cognitive dissonance between like what she actually believes versus what she's actually doing.
Yeah. And Noel's sitting next to her, agreeing with her. And I think at one point even says like, yes, we have a monogamous relationship. And that's what we've both agreed to.
Which we'll talk about later, ends up not being true at all.
Right.
And one thought that I had, I mean, when we talk about the marketing, I mean, we're kind of like weaving these parts together because I think it's hard to like keep them purely separate. But as you were talking about marketing, and as I was thinking about marketing, as I was watching these things, I mean, because we work with primarily addictions, right? And it's crazy to me because Noel really seems like an addict. I don't know if he is, and I'm not diagnosing him. But we talk a lot about rationalizations in our job, and he is using his rationalizations as a marketing tool, which is sort of genius. Like, it's crazy.
Well, I mean, when you also watch this, you see, like, because we also talk with clients about addiction is full of contradictions. Right. And what makes that possible is our human ability to compartmentalize. And so when he's on this show with his spouse sitting next to her, he is in a different compartment than when he is by himself. Or initially their marketing team was all male, which when you see their ads, that's not surprising. I think him pulling in Amanda, she was one of the first females getting involved with the marketing because they weren't attracting the females that they wanted to the site.
Right. And that was the first, I mean, I'm sure she was part of the marketing even before 2013. I think between 2013 or 2012 and 2013, I think is when like the first billboard came up with her face on it. And then later on, they ended up adding more females, generally like Hillary Clinton was one of them.
Not like in a positive light.
No, not at all. Yeah, their marketing was very interesting. And so not only that, so we talked a little bit about security versus growth. And Noel, as he was going on these interviews, he would make it pretty clear, like security is is the most important. It's integral to this business. It's vital for our customers to be able to do this. And that ended up being completely false. Which, I mean, again, like a website that's like promoting lying to your spouse, are we going to really believe that they're doing the utmost to be honest about their business practices? I don't know.
Or that they wouldn't lie to their own users.
Right.
There was a lot of that, I guess, irony or hypocrisy when you're watching the way the company was ran versus what they were also selling.
Right. So maybe just think about that the next time you go into a website. Like, are they promoting lying? Maybe think about, are they lying to you? So they would say that security and discretion were integral to the brand. Lo and behold, so on the Netflix documentary, the former director of Ashley Madison, I'm going to try to say his name right, Amit Jathani. And I'm so sorry if I said that wrong. One of his quotes was, "Things started scaling up very quickly, and security was something that came up quite frequently. We would talk about it, and we were worried about it, but it just kept falling to the back burner because it was understood that we could just make this work while keeping up with the growth plans. This is what everyone was focused on every single day. I think it was very well understood that if any of the web companies were hacked, it would be very catastrophic." And so it sounds like, it was kind of on their radar, but the money was much closer to their orbit than these security issues were.
Yeah.
The emblems on their website that like trusted security, and then the like 100% secure, and then the trusted security award emblems were completely fake.
Right, just photoshopped, created by Ashley Madison employees and put on the website.
Right. There was no, I'm sure there were IT people.
Yeah.
But there was no software or programs to actually keep this data safe. We'll talk later a little bit more about the hacker. They never found the hacker. But it was interesting because in the Hulu documentary, they talked about one of the IT people. Let's see, what was his name? Will Webster, who was got fired and was very agitated. But they found that he had privileges still, even after he left the company.
On bad terms.
Right. And they couldn't figure out how to get him off.
Yeah.
Which, I guess we're talking about the early 2000s. People are still figuring out what this internet thing is and what hacking means. And I think, for them, it was just I don't know, it's not as important as now you leave a job. That's more than likely, that's one of the first things that they're going to do is revoke your privileges in the IT system. So there were known security issues throughout Noel Biederman's time there. Nothing was ever done to fix them, even though there were plenty of emails later on that were discovered that showed him knowing about these issues, saying we should probably do something about this, and nothing ever actually being done to fix it. Which then led to the actual hack in 2015, which they think had been years. These hackers had been in his system, Ashley Madison's system, for years without anyone knowing.
Right. Prior to them making it known and them hacking the system and taking it over.
Right. Did you have any other thoughts on that?
I will just say too, with Will Webster, he was one of their initial suspects as to who was the hacker. and he had died a year before the hack, so they weren't able to, like, they kind of, that ruled him out because he just couldn't have done it, couldn't have been a part of the hack. Although, didn't they kind of say, like, I mean, again, because they're not even sure if it was one person or
Multiple.
several people, right?
Right.
So if it was several people, there's a possibility he could have been involved, but they can't prove that.
Right. I think they said something along the lines of like maybe he passed it along, or maybe it was Will and a bunch of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he passed away, then maybe everyone else took over. Because in the Netflix documentary as well, they brought in 2 high standing,
cybersecurity experts.
Swedish hackers.
Uh-huh.
Like they were like the top hackers in the world to try to figure out who this hacker was, and they couldn't figure it out.
Right.
They did have some leads. They had one lead where they actually offered this person money to like stop, and the guy was like, "This isn't me. I have nothing to do with this. I'm not taking your money." And after that, everything was a dead end. They couldn't find anything.
Right. And for a while, Noel Biederman was suspected.
Right.
Because
like
again, like, was he, the hacker or threatening to release the data as publicity? Because up until that point, there really was no line he wouldn't cross if it resulted in publicity.
Right. Which I think later on they figured out, well, maybe not so much.
Yeah, he wouldn't have gone this far.
Yeah. That's actually kind of a lot to do to yourself.
Yes.
Plus, it would just be like, you lost your job. That doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, then they hacked the system in July and gave them 30 days to.
Yeah. Yeah. So at that point, Ashley Madison had that 37 million users, and people come into work on July 13th in 2015 and open their laptops, open their computers to this message, to music, right? Some rock and roll music, and a message that they've taken over all of the system, and that they're hackers, that they have 30 days to shut Ashley Madison down, and that, like, shutting Ashley Madison down would hurt them, but not shutting it down would hurt more. And if they hadn't shut Ashley Madison down in 30 days, all of the user data would be released. So initially, their response was to keep the hack secret. They didn't want the media knowing about it. They didn't want the police knowing about it. This is where, on the Netflix documentary, they have the 2 cybersecurity experts who were former hackers, some of the best ones in the world. They hired them, brought them to the offices, and had them trying to identify who are these hackers. So the hackers called themselves the Impact Team. Mm-hmm. And that's all we know. Again, we don't know if it was actually a team, if it was one person, but that was what they were known by. So the first message, these cybersecurity experts were saying, this first message from the hackers, there was no demand for money. There was never a demand for money. And so it made it pretty clear that their motivation was not to get money, not to be paid for hacking. And so 7 days after the attack, Impact Team released a message to the media, because Ashley Madison had not let the media know that there was a hack. And so the Impact Team released a message to the media about the hack, saying that there was 30 days to shut down Ashley Madison, or they would be releasing the entire database, which included names. And a lot of these people, because of the promise, a lot of the users, because of the promise of privacy and discretion, signed up with their actual information, real names. They might have created like a username that wasn't their real name, but they had their real name on file for credit cards. And so, that left a lot of the users somewhat panicked, knowing, like, I think a lot of them thought that wouldn't happen. I think in the Netflix documentary, they talked about the only people not freaking out were divorce lawyers.
Right. Yeah.
But they talked about like who was on Ashley Madison. They said there were school principals, there were pastors, there were state prosecutors, celebrities. 15,000 of the emails were military or .gov email addresses. And, you know, which they were saying on the Netflix documentary, I hadn't thought about this until they said it, like this, some of these emails could have led to a national security crisis because they had, you know, military officials and .gov users on the platform. Right. So other like third parties. So let's say the 30 days is ticking by, and they're not able to figure out who the hackers are, and they're not able to stop the process. There was one, I think it was on the Netflix documentary. There was a guy who was, I'm trying to look what I wrote down. He basically went on the dark web and did an interview. Okay, yes. Joseph Cox. And what was he? He was a
journalist.
Yes, and he specialized in speaking with cyber criminals and hackers.
Yes.
So
and actually, that was one of my notes. It's actually kind of interesting because not once, I mean, we work in addiction, like I said. So I feel like I was just like, not once in any of these documentaries did addiction, like the word addiction, get brought up. The only time it ever got brought up was when Joseph Cox was messaging and he had asked them, why are you doing this? And the impact team was like, essentially something along the lines of like, Ashley Madison is taking advantage of addicts. And that was the only time addiction ever came up in either one of the documentaries, which was so interesting to me.
Yes. Although, I mean, as somebody, I'm sure you had this experience, somebody working in the field of sex addiction, I'm listening to a lot of the people talk, not all of them, but quite a few of them. And you're like, it sounds a lot like addiction. And they were acting out prior to Ashley Madison. I mean, at the time, again, I was working in the field of sex addiction. I was, at that point, Healing Paths was up and running. And I had clients personally who were freaked out by this potential data release and then the eventuality of the data release. They were impacted because they were users of Ashley Madison. So he reached out, Joseph Cox reached out on the dark web to do a interview basically with the impact team. And he asked them what their motivation was, and they responded. I mean, this is all in like writing, right? That they watched Ashley Madison grow their users to 37 million, and they wanted to stop the next 60 million users. They said Avid Life Media, who like basically owned Ashley Madison, Avid Life Media is like a drug dealer abusing addicts. So they were the only ones who ever used the word addiction, and they saw the exploitation of the Ashley Madison users, and had some problems with it, obviously. So the 30 days go by, and initially all of the data is released. And then third-party sites started creating, there were websites, I remember, because initially to figure it out, I mean, there were journalists and everybody kind of pouring through the initial data dump. But then there were third-party websites that were created. So you could just go in and type a name or an email address, and it would spit out whether or not they were a user on Ashley Madison. There was a radio station in Australia that had access to it. And so people could call up and give them their spouse's name to see if they were on there, and they would give it to them live on the phone. And, after one of them whose husband was on the website, and she was just like, what? And ended up hanging up on him. They were kind of like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Like that this doesn't feel good. Maybe we should stop doing this.
Yes.
Which yeah.
Let's not profit off of other people's misery, increase our listenership.
Right. And I mean, there was a lot of public shaming of these people who had used Ashley Madison. And so as a result, there were suicides.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of destruction happening to relationships and to families when all of this came out. But the first data release wasn't the only one, right? So the second data dump happened, and a couple of things were revealed in this second data dump. So also, when there was the threat of the first dump happening and all of the user data being released, Ashley Madison created, like, you could go on the website and pay $20, and it would, what they said was it would permanently remove any of your information from the website. And they made millions of dollars with users going on and, paying $20 and trying to permanently delete their information. So in the second data dump, they actually released all of Noel Biederman's inbox information, right? Like, I mean, they were like, who knows how much that is, but like, they released all of his emails. So a couple of things that came out of the second data dump was knowing that this full delete feature was completely fraudulent. Like, not only did they not remove it permanently, they did nothing. Like, users went on, they paid the $20 and nothing happened. So again, a website that is offering to protect your lies, you might want to wonder if they're also lying to you.
Right. And I think it was Joseph Cox because he was both on the Hulu and on the Netflix one. He had said, which I don't know what years this was. I think this was just a blanket statement. He had said Ashley Madison was making $1.7 million a year from that.
Yeah, just from the full delete.
The paper delete. That wasn't actually happening. Yeah.
Right. That was just basically a scam, right? And they made $20 a user. That isn't a lot. I mean, I guess when you have 37 million users, that's a lot.
But even like no other website does, like any other dating website you go on, they're not going to ask you $20 to delete your profile or delete all your messages. You just ask and they do it.
Yeah. I'm not on those dating sites, so I don't know, but yeah.
I don't know what it was like back in 15. But now, and I think even in one of the documentaries, they had said like that was unusual. Usually you don't have to ask for that. Or you don't.
Yeah, they did say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they also learned in this second data dump that Neil Biederman was not practicing monogamy with his spouse. And it never said, I don't believe it said that he was using Ashley Madison, but he was hiring. He would frequently go to escort services and hire a fairly young 18, 19-year-old women to come meet up with him. And so he was not practicing this monogamy that he, would talk about with his spouse. So that also came out with the second data dump.
Preach to everyone.
Yes. Yep.
I am faithful to my wife.
Yeah.
I love my wife.
Yeah. And we don't have to have affairs because our communication is so open and honest that, we're not vulnerable to having affairs, but the whole time he's cheating.
Which I really want to know if he had been doing these acting out behaviors before he even started this job with Ashley Madison. So when he got the job offer, it was just like, that sounds wonderful.
Right.
That would be perfect for me. Right. I should do that. I would imagine, I mean, he's 53 now and 2007. I don't know. Do the math. I would imagine that he was like acting out.
That's eight years prior. Like if we were to speculate, and that's all it would be, speculation, we can't diagnose, but if we were to speculate that, let's say he had addiction qualities, that wouldn't just start like in your marriage or
starting this job.
8 years prior to this job.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really wanted more of his, like, he wasn't going to talk to anybody, but I wish I would know that. And like, he had talked about his parents still being together, and it's like, that doesn't really mean anything. Like, your parents could still be together and be absolutely miserable.
Right. Yeah.
And you could have grown up with that, you know.
Or your parents could still be together, and that doesn't mean one of them didn't have an affair. Like, you know, we just don't know. And, you know, he was contacted for comment on these documentaries and he didn't reply. You know, so you'll get into the next part where basically he steps down as CEO and just kind of disappears from public life.
Yeah. So it was announced August 28th of 2015 that Noel had resigned as the CEO of Avid Life Media, or Ashley Madison, the sister company. And there wasn't much of anything after that from him. Like, no interviews, no nothing. So after a Google search, again, not much comes up. Like, he still lives in Canada. He's still married to Amanda. He's still working. He's working at this. He's a CEO at Avenue Insights, which is a software company in Canada. And apparently his personal website describes himself as an entrepreneur, and that's about it. And yeah, it says on his personal website, so he's an international CEO, public company board member, founder, author. I don't know what he authored, but apparently he authored something or published something. Speaker, lecturer, and father. Noel has overseen companies in a number of different verticals, most recently in the legal, tech, and online dating spaces. But in addition, in the IPTV, online real estate, and sports management arena, which I'm not really sure what any of that really means. And honestly, I don't know why you would put the dating thing into your bio.
Right. It's not like a shining point on your resume or anything. Yeah.
Right. And so later he steps down as CEO. And there's this like aftermath of just absolute destruction, kind of. I like to think of it as just absolute destruction.
I think
there is like, it's absolute destruction.
And I think most people following the case, not maybe with a personal connection, didn't see how Ashley Madison would survive this.
Right. Like, I think most people, especially on these documentaries, when they had these news clips, they were like, great, this website's going to shut down. They should shut down. This is gross. And all of that is like, just didn't happen. Like, they actually are doing much better now than ever. So in 2015, they had 37 million users in over 40 countries. In 2021, they have 75 million members.
I mean, the Impact team didn't quite keep them from reaching their next 60 million. Right. They're not quite there.
Sure.
But they're close.
And I think because on the Hulu doc, some of the actors that were playing the real people, they had been asked, like, well, why did you decide to join? Because some of them had joined after this hacking had happened. And they had said something along the lines of like, well, I knew that they were going to have to tighten things up. Like, it's going to have to get better. They can't just keep doing whatever it is that they're doing. They're going to have to actually put security protocols in place. So I felt more comfortable joining now than I did before. And it's like, okay. I don't know, man. I don't know.
Right.
Oh my God, I was about to call him Neil. That's not his name. His name is Noel. Noel steps down, and then we keep finding out things about Ashley Madison. Most prevalent being women were like so I have it here. Where did it go? Shoot. Okay. So in 2015, the number of users based off gender, so there's 27.5 million men and 4 million women. And I think Noel had gone on a lot of talk shows saying something like, we have so many women. Women love our website. They want.
Well, he was claiming it was a 60-40 split. Like there's about 60% males, 40% females, which is still a lot of females for the site.
Right. But like the actual breakdown was not it at all. Like there was
not even close.
And some of the females that were on there were not even real. So apparently, not apparently, this is pretty
it's well known.
Yes, thank you. So the female profiles were being created by Ashley Madison employees, and they were called fembots. In 2013, they had launched.
Maybe that's how he got his postmodern feminist label. Is he was creating all these feminist bots, or not feminist bots, but fembots, right?
Fembots, right? Like I am doing so much good for the world. I'm a postmodern feminist, which means I'm gonna lie and tell people that there's all these women that are wanting affairs on this website when really they're fake.
Right.
So in 2013, Ashley Madison had launched 22,000 fembots. And if you look at the revenue from 2013 to 2014, there was an uptick. So in 2012, they had $71 million worth in revenue. And then 2013, they launched these fembots. In 2014, there was $180 million in revenue. I mean, I don't think we can put this as a causation where these fembots caused this uptake in revenue, but there has to there's something happening there, I think.
Well, I don't remember. It might have been on the Netflix documentary. I can't remember now, but they said that most of the men who joined the site, they described as reluctant and shy. So they weren't really initiating. But if a female or one of these fembots initiated, they would reply to the message. And so they started having a lot of fembots reaching out to the men on the site.
Right.
And then the men would have to use their credits, which they were purchasing via a credit card, in order to view the message and respond to the message. So it sounds, I mean, they kind of were pointing to this got things moving for, a lot of the men who had some hesitation about making the first step.
Right. Right. And it was interesting because in the Hulu documentary, one of the users who actually came on as himself, I forget his name now, had said that he was starting to get an uptick in messages, but they all looked the same. It was all the same message. And he was like, this is weird. And I think he kind of put it together and didn't really respond. But yeah, if you're a guy on there who's looking for something very specific, but you're too afraid to make that first move, and then this fembot reaches out to you and is like, hi, I'm interested in you. Of course you're gonna be like, here's my money.
I think too, one of the employees who was maybe VP of sales or something on the Netflix documentary talked about how, these bot profile interactions read exactly like your average male fantasy. So they were, what they were putting out, and the men would respond. And then when it started getting into sexual talk, he was basically saying it just lined up with male sexual fantasies. And so, the men would engage more, which meant they're racking up hundreds of dollars in credit card bills.
Right. I don't know how accurate this is, and I don't know oh my gosh, what's the word? Not relevance. the word for like when something, like when you do a scientific study and it is authentic.
It's validated.
Anyways, yeah, like I don't know how uh, safe or I guess validated this website is. So a news reporter for this tech like magazine called Gizmodo had analyzed the 2015 leaked data and had come to some sort of conclusion that Ashley Madison had over 70,000 bots sending fake female profiles. Which I mean makes sense because one bot could just like keep sending out messages.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, like a human with a
Yeah.
life and a job. In 2012, Doriana Silva had submitted a lawsuit for carpal tunnel syndrome because she had to create these fake profiles. She had to create over 1,000 of them, and was complaining of like wrist pain because of having to do this all day long, which apparently
As an employee of Ashley Madison. Yeah.
right. That lawsuit was settled out of court, but in the Hulu documentary, they talk about how there was protocols in place for employees. Like they had a whole um, standard operating procedure is what I would call it, of like, this is how you create a profile.
Mm-hmm.
They had like a whole Excel spreadsheet of like different phrases that were translated into different languages so they could create, I don't know, French women and Japanese women and whatever ethnicity they had like this whole database
Mm-hmm.
for. So that eventually came out into the news outlets that a lot of these profiles were fake and that, Noel was telling the public, like, we have so many females, and that's not actually true, that
Mm-hmm.
females were not as high of users on Ashley Madison than what was described to the public. And we talked about the data delete fraud. We talked a little bit about the hacker. So the hacker was never found, despite, Ashley Madison bringing in all these top IT people to try to figure out who it was.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit about Will Webster, this previous disgruntled employee. I think, let's see. And then, let's see, in 2016, there was a class action lawsuit against, did you want me to keep going, Jackie?
Yeah. This is your part.
So I think it was 2016. I want to say it was 2016. There was a class action lawsuit for this data, for this leak, for this hack, because the company Ashley Madison had said, we take security seriously, and they actually didn't. Originally, so I had it in my notes and I don't have it anymore. Originally, there was over 18 plaintiffs, but the lawyers for Ashley Madison had said, well, if you're going to be a plaintiff on this lawsuit, you're going to have to, oh my gosh, I'm losing my words.
They would have to use their real name and identity.
Yes, they would have to not classified,
confidential.
yes,
or anonymous. They couldn't be anonymous users.
Right. So I think it was originally 27 plaintiffs, but then it dwindled down to 18 plaintiffs.
Yeah, because of people dropping out because they didn't want their identity released or to be used in this lawsuit.
Right. And in the Hulu doc, they they had said like that was actually kind of a genius move
Mm-hmm.
um,
By the
on
lawyers for Ashley Madison.
Ashley Madison's side. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the lawsuit, the plaintiffs won. They won $11.2 million, but it had to be split between the 18 of them and then the 2,500 victims that those 18 represented and all the lawyers involved. So
Yeah.
I didn't do the math and they didn't actually say what
Right.
like the number came down to, but I would imagine it probably wasn't that much.
Well,
Um,
especially compared to how much money Ashley Madison was making. And
right.
like you were saying, when after the data release, they reported that Ashley Madison was getting traffic like they'd never seen before.
Right. They reported like 3 years earlier. So 3 years earlier, so of 2016, so 2013, Ashley Madison had an annual revenue of $150 million, which is a lot. Like $11.2
Mm-hmm.
million for Ashley Madison is like nothing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And so I don't know how the $11.2 million number came about. I don't know if that's like just what they won in the case, if they actually asked for more, but the
Yeah.
courts decided on 11.2. And I like at this point in 2016, not a lot of like big hacking
Mm-hmm.
things had been happening in the world. Like I would imagine that this was probably one of the biggest that has
And
ever
and
happened.
and earliest, but it was one of the earlier
Right.
hacking jobs, right?
Right. And so I'm sure the court system was also just like, we don't know like
Mm-hmm.
what to do with this. Um, which I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just gonna stay in my lane on that. But that's just my like thinking. Like
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that before this, there hadn't been any like precedent set on
Right.
previous cases. Um, and it was interesting because nothing about like the fake bots came up either. Because
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that that would be a misrepresentation on Ashley Madison's side, and you could
Yeah.
probably sue them for that.
Yeah.
Um, which I don't know. So now the company is doing better than ever. It's still alive and out there.
Mm-hmm.
In 2021, it has 75 million members, still in like over 40 countries. And the current CEO of Ashley Madison states that our brand will continue to evolve. Um, Evan Back, which was one of the vice presidents of Ashley Madison that Noel had brought on, had mentioned in the Netflix documentary that a lot of things had changed after Noel had left. It wasn't such a fun place to work anymore, which I don't
Yeah.
know what
They
that
said
means,
it just seems like a corporate company now.
which it always was. I don't,
Right.
because like we have like honesty now or because we have like protocols in place. I don't know what that means.
I mean,
Um,
I also think it means that their marketing is not so misogynistic, aggressive, in your
sure.
face. And maybe that was part of the fun, was sitting around and coming up with those marketing ideas.
Maybe. I Yeah, I mean that would make sense. And just now it's a boring corporate job with like board
Mm-hmm.
members, I guess, that are
Yeah.
going to be
Yeah.
like yaying or naying different ideas. Um, so I thought it was funny that Evan at the end of the documentary was like, "I'm done with this place. It's not fun to work here anymore." I'm just
Right.
like, what? What was fun about it? The
Yeah.
dishonesty, the
I mean, a lot of the employees they interviewed did talk about how fun it was.
Mhm.
Um, I guess if that's your kind of fun when you go to work, I don't know.
Right. I don't know. It felt very strange to me, that idea of like it just wasn't fun, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't fun because we didn't have this boss that was really dishonest and
Mm-hmm.
described himself as a postmodern feminist or whatever.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, it's still here.
Yeah. I did like the way that the Hulu documentary ended, talking about, in this day and age, which probably would have been what, 2022, let's say, and then they released it last year. They're like, with people being more accepting of different types of
Mm-hmm.
sexuality, and just less stigma around sexuality and all of that. Like, they were basically saying there's no need to go to a website that does not involve consent at this point. Like, people can be who they want, they can have a sexual orientation, and that can be shared, and they can be open about that with the people in their life. And, to continue going to places where consent is not got, it's not received, it's not even really sought after, that's the harm still being done with Ashley Madison. And
Right.
I think, it kind of leaves people with something to think about, to wonder, like, because I think there is part of the users, and I think in the Netflix documentary, one of them maybe also talked about how keeping it secret was part of the excitement, and going into a different room to message and to read messages and to respond, and all of the secret meetings, like, that was part of the excitement. And they kind of talked about, like, a lot of users were looking, Ashley Madison gave them excitement that the life they had created for themselves didn't.
Right.
Which, to me, I'm like, okay, but then let's look at why the life they've created for themselves is not exciting. And I think that's where we can start to pivot and talk about, the work that we do as mental health therapists, and what we see with clients.
Right. I mean, I think that was a big umbrella idea for both. I think specifically more maybe for the Netflix documentary because we had Sam and Nia Radar on the Netflix
Mm-hmm.
documentary, and Sam had just really um, like bought into this idea of like the falling in love and the big exciting life, and he
Mm-hmm.
describes his life just as like not exciting anymore and it became monotonous. He had said the picture of love that I had seen in movies that I wanted for myself just started disappearing. That kind of passion and romantic love, I wanted something exciting for my life and I wanted more of the good stuff life had to give.
Mm-hmm.
um, so
He
that
also he also talked about in that documentary that he just had this need to be seen, right,
and
and to
validated.
feel. Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. And I mean, it doesn't connect this with their story, but it does seem a little bit like when the children started coming is
Mhm.
when he felt like his life was not exciting anymore, and his needs weren't really being met. I mean, I would say too, like, if he were my client, I would say these are some immature needs, and functional adults have to be able to, take care of children. And yeah, that's maybe a harder phase of life, and it's a very busy phase of life with a lot of demands put on you. But we should be able to go through that, kind of understanding why we chose to have kids, why I want to parent in this way because it's healthier, it produces better human beings, whatever that is.
Right. And I think too, I don't think men fully, well, maybe women too. I don't want to blanket statement this, but like there's not a real full understanding of what's going to happen when you do start having kids. And I think
Mm-hmm.
for men, it's like I don't think they fully realized the changes that were going to happen in their wife.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're going to become different. And that is going to
Yes.
be, it's just like one, that's normal. And two, how are you going to be able to manage that? Because they're not just your wife anymore, they are a mom. And
Uh-huh.
being a parent or being a mom is much different than just I don't want to like
Uh-huh.
use that, but being just a wife.
Or even just being a romantic partner, a sexual partner, like that is impacted by kids.
Right.
And it should be for both, not just her. I think if it isn't kind of a partnership that's happening in the relationship, and where the husband is as involved in the raising of the children, then then that's a bigger problem for her.
Right.
It's going to take up more of her time and more of her emotional space.
Right. And then the men, again, I'm blanket, this could be a man or a woman. But there's this whole like we talk about intimacy, and I think for men, the idea of intimacy is physical. And like that's just one little pie slice of what intimacy should be in a relationship. Like the physical relationship is not what intimacy really is. And passion and desire can be a part of that intimacy, but trust and honesty and respect for your partner is going to have to be like another part of that pie, like the pie of intimacy.
And I would say if we have other aspects to intimacy, we have emotional intimacy, we have, both of us trying to like work as a team to raise the kids, to manage the house, to do all of these things, then I would say usually that leads to a deeper sexual intimacy.
Right.
Maybe not more sexual frequency, especially at some phases of life, but it can lead to a deeper sexual intimacy.
Right.
But I also think sometimes for people who haven't, maybe they weren't raised in the most secure of families, and so they're leaving the family with some issues that they're going to take into whatever relationships they are a part of. That like they're approaching their relationship needs differently.
Right. I had written down a note. It's kind of long, but I had said, like, I was thinking about this and I was thinking like, well, if we're talking about real feminism, not Neil's version of feminism. Noel, thank you. Okay. I don't know why I keep wanting to call him Neil.
I called him Neil too early on.
So if we're talking about real feminism, not Neil's version of what feminism is, then we're talking about how men were not really taught how to have real intimate relationships with each other, less with like a romantic partner or wife or spouse. So when men enter into these marriages, their focus is mostly on the physical aspect of intimacy versus like the emotional or mental intimacy aspects of the relationship, or intimacy just as a whole. And so when the physical relationship is lacking, men think that there's something lacking in their relationships as a whole, like there's not that excitement and desire and passion, which is not what intimacy is. What they're actually lacking is something that's requiring depth and realness in their relationship. And that's, I think, something that men are pretty incapable of doing because our society has told them that they don't have to do that.
Right.
And they've never developed that skill. So now they're in this relationship. They're with their wife. They're thinking like, this is my most intimate relationship. And their wife is thinking like, this is actually maybe not my most intimate relationship. Like this is one intimate relationship, but I actually have multiple intimate relationships.
Right.
And so,
and maybe even rely on my girlfriends to meet more of my emotional needs than my spouse, who doesn't really know how to show up for me emotionally. He might lean on me emotionally, but he doesn't actually know how to show up for me emotionally.
Right. So then feminism, if we're talking about real feminism, it's that idea of like men should be allowed and should know how to do this, and that's okay. It's okay for you to be emotional beings. And
I would say like one of the big feminist leaders back in the second wave feminism. So I think we're talking like the 50s, 60s, 70s, Betty Friedan. She always talked about how third wave feminism was about freeing men from some of the shackles of patriarchy, and allowing them to have more emotions and to be more of a feeling person than patriarchy allowed them to be. We haven't had third wave feminism. And now we're maybe rolling back some of the progress from second wave feminism. But yeah, I mean, early feminist leaders also understood that patriarchy did not just harm women, it also harmed men. And these are some of the ways that it harmed men.
Right. And I think that can, like, it all kind of, I think of it as like a giant funnel. Like the funnel is infidelity and cheating, and then there's like cultural ideas and attachment stuff and family and biology and whatever else into this funnel, that all kind of like play on each other.
Yeah.
Because I think
I was just going to say, it was also evident watching both documentaries, the way they talked about needing excitement, right? To me says they kind of hit a point and they didn't know how to go deeper with intimacy. So they went back to having something new and exciting.
Right. That didn't require depth.
Yes, it didn't require depth. And this person didn't really know them. So they could do kind of the beginning over again as many times as they wanted, right? They talked about how Ashley Madison would have recurring users. Like they'd come on the site, they'd have an affair, that affair might end, they go back to their marriage and they're happy, but then they'd come back at some point and have another affair. Right. Again, if that's the traction we can get and it's limited and it has an edge to the universe of how far men, because most of the users were males, could go before they needed kind of that novelty and newness again, then it makes sense to me that their number of users.
Right.
And I think that said, they also talked a lot about how couples just don't communicate. They don't communicate about sex, but they don't communicate. And to me, I'm like, right. Because what's the motivation for men to start opening up and communicating when they can just go have an affair?
Right. And well, they just don't know how. Like it's not a skill of theirs. And so they're like completely out of their depths in this marriage. The wife is looking at them. Okay, this is my footnote. I do not hate men. I love men. I actually feel sad for men. Like I feel sad that they have to go through life with like this, not disability, but like just this lack of like emotional skills. It makes me sad because you're an emotional being. You should be able to form these types of relationships. So that's my footnote. Back to my original thoughts. Like their wife is looking at them like, I'm a feelings person. Like I have feelings. Can we please talk about this? And I think for men, they're just like, I feel so out of place. Like I am a fish out of water. I can't even, like as a man, I'm thinking like, I can't even think about how I'm feeling right now, let alone process how you're feeling right now. Which then I think kind of goes back, like it kind of connects to this idea of like the attachment stuff and how they were raised as how they were raised as children. And just like not being able to develop those skills because they were told that they were boys and that they were going to be men and that they have to be a man.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Well, and I think there can be like, because there are a lot of men who are raised by single moms and I don't know if we have research on this. Single moms again, they're women, they have emotions. If they have sisters, they have emotions and they're allowed to have emotions. And they might start out learning some of that or being raised in a similar way as their sisters. But at some point when they're, hitting puberty and crossing into the young man status, unless they're getting those messages from men, I think there's a likelihood that they reject that and are like, that's girl stuff. That's women stuff. And I don't want to be a girl. I don't want to be feminine, right? Like I want to be accepted by the males. And this is the message males are giving. So I think there has to be male mentors or, people in their life who are able to have some of those skills to say, here's an option of how to be a male. And that's probably going to feel better for you and for me if we can have that emotional connection and some depth to that.
Right. Which requires, I think, like you said, it just requires skill and practice and someone showing you how to do that.
Yeah. It's that way of, and we see this in our offices all the time. It's a way of seeking a solution to the problems they're feeling through sex. And that doesn't work. It doesn't work long term. I also thought it was interesting. I think I mentioned this part, like it provides them excitement when the life they've created for themselves doesn't. And to me, I'm like, wait, let's pause there and have a whole discussion about why this life they've created is not meaningful to them. I wouldn't say, because we don't have to have a ton of excitement in our life. I think it can be a psychological boost to have something to look forward to, but that can be a pretty wide variety of what those things can be.
Right.
And to me, I'm like, nobody's asking the question of like, why isn't their life enough for them? And what about the way men are creating their life isn't working?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because I will often say to some of my clients, like, the path that patriarchy gives you, you might have some power over others and particularly over women. But if you don't do some deeper work of your own and create a life that is meaningful and satisfying to you, a lot of males end with a death in violence, suicide, depression. Like, that's the end of the road. And that's not what they're telling you. But these maybe toxic messages about masculinity, that is where that leads. And we know that, men have more suicide and more violent suicide, and they're more likely to be killed by violence. So yeah, I think that's that's just something that they should also, if we're talking about informed consent, then they should be given that informed consent, that this model that you've been given for maleness has this ending.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of research also shows not only along the lines of just higher rates of depression, anxiety, suicide rates, they just lack, all of that. What's causing that is the lack of your relationships. Like most men's most intimate relationship is with their wife.
Mm-hmm.
They don't
and with us, we're able to talk to those wives and ask them, right, how relational, how emotional do you feel in this relationship?
And usually
how connected are you? And they're like, yeah, I wish.
Right. And most of females are finding that in other ways. They're finding it through their female relationships usually. And so, yeah, like what does it mean? What does an exciting life mean for you? When we ask that question, what sort of ideas come to your head? And if it is mostly like desire and passion, which are okay in our culture for men to feel, versus like a whole integrated person, grounded, knowing that not everything is going to be up here and not everything is going to be here, but it's hopefully going to be like somewhere in here where it's up and down, and that's okay.
Or like I will talk too about how, some of the emotions patriarchy or our culture allows men to have, it's limited, right? And ironically, they're the two that our culture doesn't really like women to have, but it's sexual desire and anger.
Right.
That's not going to lead you to a very fulfilled life if what you can have is anger or sexual desire. Sometimes those emotions get fused. But if the only option you have to being angry is sexual excitement, which they talked about in this documentary, how many men came to a point of resenting their spouse. And resentment is some anger. I'm like, so of course you bounce into the other emotion you're given, which is to seek some sexual desire. But that's not a meaningful life if you're bouncing back and forth between anger and sexual desire.
Right. Or, I mean, and the validation piece as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you want this validation from your spouse, but you're not willing to show up as a fully emotional, integrated
Mm-hmm.
person. So you want physical validation is what you
Right,
want. You want
right.
that is the type of validation that you want at that point. Because
or maybe that's the only validation you know to recognize.
Right. Right.
And I would say sometimes with our clients, sex is meeting way more needs than it should be.
Right. Like, this can't be everything
Yeah.
for you. I don't know. Emily Nagoski talks a lot about the desire imperative in her new book. Have you started reading it?
I've started it, yeah.
Yeah.
What's it called again?
Come Together.
Come Together, yeah.
Yeah. She talks about the desire imperative and how our society just really values desire versus just pleasure. I don't know what made me think of that. Just like this idea that like men want to be desired and they want their wives to desire them. But I don't know. There's something there. The
Okay.
plot is fully formed.
You're leaving our listeners hanging there. We'll have to come back to that in a different episode. I mean, I do think a lot of us in our childhood get we end up, based on our childhood, we end up with a lot of complicated feelings around pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a way to bypass just pleasure for the sake of pleasure, which is a vulnerable state to be in, right? But a way to kind of bypass that is desire. And so whether that's, desiring status and financial things and sexual partners and, feeling that desire yourself, or feeling like I'm more desirable because I've climbed this social status. I'm at the top of the hierarchy kind of thing. But that's not really about pleasure.
I think my thought is that because maybe men, and again, we talk a lot about men, like this could also be women, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think most of it is mostly men, and we see mostly men with these types of like issues.
Mm-hmm.
But it also can be women. I think when I'm thinking of the desire imperative, I'm thinking that they're looking for validation through desire, like, versus, yeah, your wife maybe isn't as like jumping on you all the time because you've been married for 10 years and you have 3 kids together.
Mm-hmm.
That's normal.
Right. Well, and she does talk about, doesn't she, that like, if desire has to be spontaneous, then we will have a lot of periods of times when we're not necessarily happy, because desire isn't best being spontaneous. When you have young kids, when you have things like that, like sometimes we do have to schedule it in. And if you think that desire really is best in the moment, right, in the spontaneous, when it's not even on my radar, and my spouse just wants me, right, that's different.
Right. Right. And like, why is pleasure any worse than what desire is, or passion is?
Right.
Why can't, maybe your wife isn't jumping your bones, but she still kind of likes you. So maybe go with that. Like,
yeah.
You guys still like each other. You're still friends at this point.
Right.
Which is totally fine. And maybe the desire kind of ebbs and flows throughout your marriage, but if that's all you're basing your marital satisfaction on is this desire and passion piece, you're going to be miserable, which I think is what we talked about, like the excitement. What does that mean? And if
Yeah.
that's all that is, if when you think of marriage and all you think about is just hot, passionate sex, bro, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
You're going to be miserable. Like maybe
Yeah.
we need to redefine that. And I had another idea of like the attachment piece, where as young boys, no one was actually looking at you and saying, "Oh, you're crying. What is the matter? How can I help you? What are you sad about?" And so maybe now as an adult, we're kind of masking that as wanting validation for something else.
I mean, I do think, and there has been research that shows this, that little boys, like even as young as, well, I mean, there's research that shows little boy babies, when we're gazing at them, we will gaze at a female baby longer, kind of holding that eye contact longer than we do baby boys. And I often say, and hence we think it's a baby issue, right? That girls somehow are more, they gaze back or something. So it's really about the baby, not about the person, the adult doing the gazing, right? They've actually taken the same babies, dressed them as boys, dressed them as girls, and determined the length of time. And boys get less eye contact, even as infants, right? When they're being held pretty close to the human face. And then I think, from very young ages, when they start to talk, we're much more likely to tell little boys that they're tough and they're okay when they fall down. And we're much more likely to invite girls into relationships like, "Oh, come here. Let me give you a hug. Let me kiss that better." We're much more likely to, and that's just, I mean, there's not really a lot of distinguishable differences at those ages between males and females. And we, the more of the adults with the biases are projecting that onto them. They're going to feel that, and that's going to start shaping them.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so let's wrap up with this podcast episode. Again, we'll have you back again with the topic we've planned for podcast 2 with you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jackie. I appreciate it.
Yeah. At the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there's something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.